All right, welcome to this Q&A. Again, want to welcome everyone to this Q&A. Question came in earlier. It was more a kashrus question, but question that does come up and has to do with medicine, right? In general, any medicine that is sweet tasting should have proper rabbinic supervision on it. Why? Because they put in different flavors, different things. So that for sure would need rabbinic supervision. If it's something, let's say, a pill, in general, whatever the pill is, and well, let's say not a vitamin, but let's say whatever, a regular pill. A regular pill normally is very bitter, right? So how are you going to take a regular pill? You swallow it, right? Normally it's going to be swallowed, or let's say even if it's in liquid form, right? It really doesn't really matter, right? Even if it's in liquid form, but it tastes like, I don't know, turpentine, right? It tastes very bitter. So if it doesn't have a sweet flavor, in general, would not need rabbinic supervision, right? Let's say we had cough syrup. Cough syrup's not flavored, right? So in general, cough syrup would not need rabbinic supervision. If it's sweetened, then if it sure needs rabbinic supervision, and then there's a whole question whether you make a blessing, whether you're going to make a blessing on it or not. So most medicine, in general, doesn't taste good. So really shouldn't need any rabbinic supervision. Question would be, there are some, let's say, Tylenol or other aspirin or whatever comes in a gel cap. Now, it comes in a gel cap, that's a problem, right? In general, it's a problem because gelatin normally comes from a non-kosher animal. And if it comes from a non-kosher animal, then it could be a problem to swallow it, right? To eat it in any form. But you say it's for medicine. Even though we would say maybe for medicine it should be okay, because you're not really ingesting it to get benefit from, right? The reality is it's not like regular food, so therefore maybe it's okay, because it's only for the sake of food to get better for medicine, right? The problem is it's a gel cap. So gelatin, unless it's kosher gelatin, would be forbidden. But most likely, gelatin comes from a non-kosher animal. Now, if that is the case, so you say, okay, let me take the gelatin off the cap. Let me cut it off the cap. Problem is, you won't be able to take the medicine otherwise. Right? You get rid of that, you can't, there's probably no way to take the medicine. Now the question is, what do you do? Let's say you got a prescribed medicine, whatever it is, and the only way you can take it is a gel cap. And that's the only way you can take it. So I've heard rabbis give the following advice. That's the only way you can take it. So then you should swallow it in a tissue, right? Take a little bit of a tissue, cover the cap, cover the pill, and swallow it. Now, someone's going to ask, how does that help? You're still swallowing it. You're not swallowing it directly. You're not taking the pill itself and swallowing it directly. So therefore, if you don't swallow it directly, you swallow it with a tissue, right? A tissue is not going to hurt you. It's not dangerous over here. Right, you take a little bit of a tissue, you swallow it with the tissue. So what's the main thing going down? Is the tissue, right? So you're not really getting benefit, right? You're not getting benefit from the gel cap. Some may say, well, doesn't matter if it's in a tissue or not, or in anything else. You're still getting benefit. This is less direct, right? So there are rabbinical authorities that will say, if no choice to take it, meaning it's obligatory to take, so take it in a tissue, wrap it up a little bit in the tissue, swallow it, you don't have any problems, right? That we would say would take away the problem. So in general, does the gel cap need rabbinic supervision? No, definitely doesn't need rabbinic supervision. It's not even if it comes. So this is the question. Even if it comes from an animal, right? You say, well, it's got meat fat or something. It should be meat. But the reality is, gelatin is, I think, it's ground up from the bone itself, right? So if it's ground up, it doesn't have any taste at all. It's kind of like if a person, God forbid, a Jew, ate the sciatic nerve, right? We're called the Gita Nosh. Now, normally that's not going to happen. Why? Because when an animal is slaughtered, kosher, the hind of the animal is sold to a non-Jew. We don't do flavoring, right? There aren't too many people in this, in this generation that know how to take out the sciatic nerve. It's extremely complicated. So they just take a loss and sell the hind quarter of an animal to a non-Jew. They'll sell it for pennies on the dollar. They're going to lose out, but in the end, can't eat it, right? Can't eat it, and it's hard to get the sciatic nerve out. Now, what would happen if, God forbid, the Gemara brings up the case, or a number of cases, you ate it, right? Let's say it was mixed in with other meat or whatever, right? Is there a problem? Could I nullify it? Could potentially nullify it, but what if I ate it straight? Maybe it's not a problem at all. Why? Because if you eat the sciatic nerve, it tastes, in my language, like tree bark. Right? It's like eating sawdust. Sawdust has no taste. Right? Technically, it's forbidden 100%, to eat it because Torah says you're not allowed to eat it. But in the end, if it's ground up and it tastes like sawdust, first of all, it's not the same thing. But in the end, it's sawdust. It doesn't give off any taste. There is no flavor over here. It tastes like tree bark. It's still forbidden. Right? Still should be forbidden. But nonetheless, even if a person ate from it, could be that the transgression is much less. And the reason is because it doesn't have any taste. But you're going to tell me, but isn't it forbidden? I'm not saying it's not forbidden. Question is, does it give off taste? Right? That's the question of gelatin. Right? If you're going to tell me gelatin comes from a non-kosher animal, which it probably does, unless it says that there's a rabbinic supervision, meaning that the gelatin comes from a kosher animal. So even if that would be the case, since it's like sawdust, doesn't really have the status of meat. So therefore, even if a person ate it, I can eat it with dairy. I can eat it with meat either way. Right? You tell me, well, if it's meat, I can always eat it with meat. True, but I can also eat it with dairy. Why can I eat it with dairy? Again, there's no taste. There's no meat taste over here. Right? The thing tastes like sawdust. If it tastes like sawdust, not a problem. So that would answer the other question. Can be taken with meal. That's dairy. Not a problem. Right? Because it tastes like sawdust. Right? The question was by a supplement. Let's say a fish oil supplement. So capsules in general, get around the problem, put it in the tissue, swallow it, not an issue. Better, I would say, find a substitute that has rabbinic supervision. That would take you out of the problem altogether. Right? But there is a leniency here. Right? There is a leniency that can be relied on. And that is, even if you tell me it comes from a non-kosher animal, right? And you're going to ingest it, so take it with the tissue. And that would take you out of the problem. Right? That should take you out of the problem. Now again, someone would say, well, what's better? What's better? Well, it's better to find rabbinic supervision. Find the supplement rabbinic supervision. That would be the best thing to do. So now there's another question. Another question that comes up is, which I alluded to before, and that is, what about vitamins? So you say, what about them? If it says 100% vitamin C or vitamin D, forget the liquid form, we'll say in the pill form. Right? It should have rabbinic supervision. Now, you tell me if it's 100% vitamin C, why does it need supervision? Why does it need rabbinic supervision? Because you don't know if they added anything else or not. They may say nothing else is added. Maybe. Right? Maybe they put a coating on it. You don't know. You don't know 100%. Right? So therefore, if it's, you get a vitamin or a multivitamin, whatever it is, should have rabbinic supervision on it. Now, if someone were to ask, well, does it have to have the best rabbinic supervision? I wouldn't say it has to have the best rabbinic supervision, right? It can have, rabbinic supervision. Maybe you would need other things from that, right? Let's say this rabbinic supervision gave it over meats. So if it's not the greatest rabbinic supervision, you wouldn't normally eat the meat. But if it's something like this, where it's bitter, or it's not sweet tasting, so therefore, who says I need the best rabbinic supervision? If it's got a sweet taste, should have rabbinic supervision. Because you want to make sure there's nothing else in it. That what the rabbinic supervision is telling you is that they didn't add anything else. There are no other ingredients that aren't kosher in it. But again, that's only if it tastes good. If it doesn't taste good, I shouldn't need rabbinic supervision. So basically any medicine, right? Any medicine you should be able to take because it's bitter, right? If it's bitter. Now the problem is, what if it's in a gel cap? Okay, that's a question. But most medicine in general should be okay. Now, what about so vitamins? Vitamins might be a little bit different, right? To say, well, it says vitamin D, 100% vitamin D. And you may see that it does have rabbinic supervision, right? Some vitamins do, some don't. So you say, why does it have rabbinic supervision? Have rabbinic supervision tell you there is nothing else added. And if it didn't have rabbinic supervision, again, it would depend what it is. But there are a lot of vitamins out there that have rabbinic supervision. So therefore, instead of relying on different leniencies, find a vitamin, whatever. If it's vitamin B12, B6, vitamin D, you should take it and make sure it's got rabbinic supervision. It's got proper rabbinic supervision, even if it tastes bitter. Right? Again, a way out of that problem, if it didn't have rabbinic supervision, I take in the tissue, that should take care of it also. You have to, how do I know they didn't add anything? Because you're not getting direct benefit. Right? But, again, it makes sense. It makes sense, something like this, to have proper rabbinic supervision, right? If possible. And there are a lot of vitamins out there you can order. You probably order online that have proper rabbinic supervision. Some people will be stringent that even something that may not need proper rabbinic supervision, they'll still be stringent. Right? They don't want to, if they wouldn't rely on a less reliable rabbinic supervision for other things, why would they rely on this? So you can say maybe, vitamins might be different because really there shouldn't be anything else added to it. Whatever, there are potentially a number of different reasons. So, when it comes to, I would say when it comes to kashrus in general, so we'll throw this out there for a little bit. When it comes to kashrus in general, doesn't seem like it's something we should mess with. Right? In other words, a person's going to keep kosher. You try and keep the highest level you can. There is a lot of rabbinic supervision on a lot of different products. Right? A lot of different hechshers, as they are called. Some are better, some are not. Right? Some more reliable, etc. So, in my journey, it's been ingrained in my head that you don't mess around with these things. In other words, eat certain, if you can get them, certain hechsherim, that are top of the notch, hechsherim, and stick to those. They can say, well, if I do that, I live in the middle of nowhere, I'm not going to eat that much. Okay, so that might be a different issue. Right? But, if you live in a place where there are a lot of different hechsherim, just because there's certain things you like to eat and it has a weaker, let's say, weaker hechsher, I would say you're playing with fire. Now, I'll make one caveat. And the caveat is, in this generation, my kids' generation, people were more lenient. Why are they more lenient? I'm not quite sure. But since there are a lot of different hechsher, I'm not going to say they're going to eat from all of them, right? But a lot of them they'll eat from. So, again, the way I was taught was that you stick to certain hechsher that have the best name, have the highest standards, and that's it. And, you stick to 2 or 3, then what's going to happen? You'll be able to eat most things. Most things you won't have a problem. Again, if you live in a proper Jewish community. If you don't live in a proper Jewish community, then it's a whole different issue. Then, you get whatever you can get, pretty much. I would say some supervision is better than others, but, you have to know, what should be relied on, what not. So, again, I can't really give an answer, why people would rely on, let's say, less stringent hechsherim today. I don't know. It's something like you're playing with fire. So, for myself, I eat certain hechsherim, 2 or 3. And that's it. I'm not saying others are necessarily they're all bad. I'm not going to say that. There are some that are better than others, right? I don't think there's any question. At the same time, I don't see the need. Again, I'm older, so maybe it's a little bit different, but, I don't see a need to play with hechsher. If things are on a lower standards, but everybody eats it. I don't know. I remember of a certain hechsher that as a relative of my Rebbe, someone asked before he gave class once about it's a piece of candy. And he asked my Rebbe years ago, about this rabbinic supervision. Because he's thinking what could go wrong. It's only a hard sucking candy or whatever it was. So he says, "Oh, that's my relative." So Rebbe said, "Oh, that's my relative. Don't touch it." He's like, "Don't eat it." So you can say, okay, my Rebbe is very strict, this, that, the other thing. I've asked her a number of times over the years because that rabbinic supervision has a lot of things in Israel. Seemingly a lot of people eat. So I asked him again over the years. I asked him, what does Rav hold about this, about this hechsher? I said, does Rav hold the same thing? He said, yeah. Okay. Right. So that's what he holds. Now, could be others may disagree. They can disagree. They can certainly disagree, but again, person has the Rav, they ask the Rav the question. That's it. Says you can rely on it. Fine, you can't. So I see plenty of things with this rabbinic supervision look very tasty. What can I do? I can hear his voice ringing in my ears. Don't touch it. Right. So that's it. I mean, for me, that's it. Everyone has to ask their own, their own das Torah. They have to ask their own, local Orthodox rabbi what to do, wherever they hold by. Right. So, these are things that, shouldn't be relied on because we don't play with hechsher. We don't play with these type of things because again, these things have an effect on us. Has an effect on the soul. Now, someone will tell me that all hechsherim rely on certain leniencies. True. Even the best of the best rely on certain leniencies. Okay. But certain names, certain hechsherim have certainly good names, better names, worse names. The person has to know. A person has to know. And again, I would say it's not something to mess with. Now, on that, I will mention, someone may say, well, can I eat salad? Can I go to a non-kosher restaurant and eat salad? Right now, how are we going to define non-kosher over here? How are we going to define non-kosher? So I'll define non-kosher by being a place that's non-kosher meat. So a person will say, I'll eat fish. Fish is kosher. Now, what could be the problem? Well, very simple. Even if the fish is kosher, what's the fish being cooked on? A grill. And that grill most likely been used within 24 hours. So it's got the potency of meat cooked on it. So now, once you cook meat on that, in that oven, on that grill, let's say better on that grill, that entire grill now is non-kosher meat. Totally 100% non-kosher meat directly on the grill. Now, on that same grill, even if there's no meat being cooked, right? They cook my fish. Oh, not mine. They cook fish, kosher fish. How can a person eat the kosher fish? Can't eat it. Why not? Because the taste of meat absorbs into the grill. And that fish is going to absorb that non-kosher taste. Forbidden, according to everybody. It's forbidden. I do know some people kept kosher or keep kosher, let's say. And they say I eat fish out. Now, if it's a treif restaurant, meaning they serve non-kosher meats, how can you eat fish out? Can't eat fish out. And any side dish, French fries, whatever, what are you going to sit there and ask? Do you put oil? Is it lard? Does it get mixed with? You get a million questions. A million questions. So that's very easy. That's very easy to deal with. So now I'll ask another question. They don't serve meat. It's a vegetarian restaurant. Can you eat from the salad bar? So what's at the salad bar? Right? Vegetables. What could be the problem? Well, if you got lettuce, you got a problem with bugs. One problem. You got onions there. So if they were cut with a knife, you don't know what's going on in the back. It's probably better you don't because you never eat at these places. Right? But who knows? Someone working there, could have used that knife to cut a sandwich, to cut meat. So you're going to say, okay, big deal. So let's say it's cold. It's not hot. We'll make it easy. All we'd have to do is wash off the knife. But if it cut an onion is something that's sharp. What we call a davar charif. It's something that's sharp. So what does it do? So even though that knife was used to cut cold meats, so now I use it to cut this onion. It revitalizes the knife, means it makes the knife stronger, taste-wise, takes the taste of meat. Now I got a problem also. Or dairy, no different. Shouldn't be able, then it's going to have that taste on the onion. Right? So you got that problem. And you got a bug problem. Not to mention you have a dressing problem. Dressing's probably not kosher. Right? So even if there's no meat there, per se, first of all, again, you don't know what's going on in the back. And even if we say, well, the knife they use totally clean, not an issue over here, so then you got a problem with bugs. Then, I wish I had to check for bugs. You're going to run into that issue. Certainly going to run into that issue. And not to mention the issue about, salad dressing. Right? Most likely it's not kosher salad dressing. So going into any of these places, for a Jew, would be highly problematic. Extremely problematic. right? Certainly, if it's a place that has, as non-kosher meat. And let's say a lot of these restaurants are milk and meat together. So you could have that issue also. You have a mixture of milk and meat. Could be on the plate, could be on the silverware. They're not stringent for that, no question. They'll clean it off, whatever, but there'll be issues. There'll be many, many issues, cooking issues, especially. So, non-kosher restaurants, you have those issues. A vegan restaurant, right? Salad bar, you got those issues. And what else can they serve in a salad bar? Right? Certainly in the States, I know anywhere else they could sell in a salad bar. They can have the normal vegetables. You got onions, tomatoes. You got lettuce, cabbage, cucumbers. You can also have raw broccoli or raw cauliflower, right? Some places they eat it raw, put it on, put it as part of the salad bar. So you say, what could be the problem with that? It's infested, right? Cauliflower, broccoli, totally infested. Very, very hard to check. There are certain companies that have a certain way of washing these type of vegetables, but if they're raw, wouldn't touch them. It is too hard to check. Way too hard to check. There could be another issue. Right? So there's a misnomer that some people think that, I go to any of these places, not that big of a problem. I'll eat fish. I'll only eat the salad bar. I'll only eat, whatever they think might be permissible. But there might be 15 problems, at least, with all these things. Going to an open market, another question. Going to an open fish market, where there are non-kosher fish there. Also a problem, right? The knife that's used to cut it could be cut other things, right? You could have issues with that. So a person, let's say, we'll be a little bit nicer over here. Let's say a person, goes into a supermarket, go to the frozen section, you see they have salmon. All right, salmon's kosher. Now, do I have to necessarily worry? Let's say it's frozen. Do I have to worry what it was cut with? Right, so some would say, maybe I don't have a problem. Maybe I don't have a problem with that. Why not? Maybe I don't have a problem because, it's 100% kosher, right? The fish is kosher. I have to worry now, right? Do I have to worry now? The issue with, what it's cut with, right? Maybe I don't have that problem. Maybe I shouldn't have that problem altogether. Right? It's already frozen. What can I do? Right? So it could be. It could be that there's going to be an issue with, how it's cut and all that. So you have an issue. So you have an issue over here with, let's say, with the fish itself. Because you don't know what it was cut with. Maybe it was cut with a treif knife, right? So make the whole thing treif, maybe. Right? Maybe that would be the case. Right? So then what would you do? So normally, we would say what you would have to do is cut around. After you let it thaw, you cut around. Cut like an inch around the fish. And that should take you around the problem. Right? That should take you around the problem. Otherwise, there's a real issue here. It's a serious issue. of doing that. So if a person, got frozen fish and it's known to be a kosher frozen fish, I would say maybe, again, it's not, as long as you know it's a kosher frozen fish and you know that it's got scales and fins, right? This fish has scales and fins, right? So much less of a problem. Question is, should you cut around it or not, right? That's what we mentioned before, right? You have an obligation to cut around it, right? That's really the question. Yeah. Well, one second. Yeah, so there is a question about purchasing cut fish from a store that sells non-kosher fish. Right, even though it's got scales and fins, you know it to be kosher. But the proprietor of the store, you can't believe him. You can't believe the knife that's used is exclusively used for kosher fish. He can say, I only use this knife for kosher fish. Can't believe him. Right, certainly can't believe him. Because maybe it's got non-kosher residue on the fish. On the knife. You just say, maybe they washed it. Right, maybe they washed it, but you don't know. You have no idea. Right, so what you should do is thoroughly wash it, cut the surface. Right, lightly scrape it with a knife edge. Now, that's if they're non-kosher fish. If there are kosher fish, they only sell kosher fish. So you're allowed to purchase cut fish if the scales are recognizable, even though the knife may not be kosher or not. Why not? Sorry, why would that not be an issue? Again, because fish itself is kosher. Fish is kosher and much less of an issue. Much less of an issue. Yeah, another issue, by the way, by salad bar, which I didn't mention, is let's say, right, let's say vegetables are cut with a shredder. Now, a person would have to determine whether the shredder been used for anything else, right? Anything non-kosher, i.e., maybe it was used for non-kosher cheese. Let's say it was used for non-kosher cheese. Now, what's the problem? Even if it was a shredder, you can imagine it's hard to clean. So if the salad contains radishes or onions, more difficult. Why? Because a radish or an onion is something sharp. So if it's sharp, it's going to take on the status of whatever it was cut with. So if it was used with a shredder, and now the shredder still has cheese in it, non-kosher cheese, well, guess what? Now, because I have something that's sharp, it's going to take on that status of the non-kosher cheese. So that's going to make it a problem, right? That is definitely going to be a problem. So again, someone goes to a fish market, if it's all kosher fish, even if the knife might not be kosher, I'm still good, right? It still should be okay. You can cut around the outside of the fish and eat the rest of the fish, wouldn't be an issue. But if there's non-kosher fish there, then I got a bigger issue, right? Then I have a bigger issue. Why? Because you cannot trust whoever's there. You can't trust the workers or the owner. And when you ask them, well, did you cut this? Did you use this knife to cut non-kosher fish? You could be lying. You have no idea. You can't trust. Well, the question is, you wanted to eat this fish. You wanted to rely on this. So what do? So the fish should be thoroughly washed. You cut the surfaces. lightly scraped with a knife edge. Right? That's if you have non-kosher fish. Kosher fish, I don't necessarily have to do that. Right? Also, person wouldn't be allowed, just on this topic, to purchase a pickled or salted fish. Right? If it's cut with a non-kosher knife. Right? That's going to be a problem because, again, it's pickled, sharp. Right? Since it's something sharp, then it's going to be an issue to cut it with a non-kosher knife. Because if I cut it with a non-kosher knife, what's going to happen? It's going to take all the properties of that non-kosher fish, right? Or whatever. That non-kosher pickled fish is going to go into my knife. It's going to be very strong. Very, very strong, right? So anything pickled or salted, 100% should have proper rabbinic supervision. That, we don't want to necessarily fool around with either, because it's a much more serious issue. Because these things are, what's it called? They're something sharp. Something sharp revitalizes that thing itself. So even if the knife wasn't used within 24 hours, and we hold the knife not used, or a pan or a pot not used within 24 hours, meat or milk, it's considered rancid, it's considered stale, does not give off the taste of milk or meat. But if I cut up an onion, right, let's say with a dairy knife, the dairy knife was not used within 24 hours. So the taste of the dairy knife is stale. I'm not allowed to cook the onions with meat in a meat pot. And if I do, I mess up the pot. Why? Because my onion now has the status of dairy like it was used within 24 hours. So if it's got the status of dairy that's been used within 24 hours, I cannot cook it in a meat pot. That 100% is going to be forbidden. Right? That would be forbidden. So anything sharp, we got to be careful. So it's funny, in a certain way, that, when I was growing up, and I was becoming religious, so, I knew people who were conservative. Okay, they weren't Orthodox. And they would eat fish out. Maybe they would eat cheese out. Maybe they say, cheese doesn't need proper rabbinic supervision, right? The problem is with rennet in the cheese. But okay, without getting into that, they'll say, I'll eat fish out. Now, you might be a lot more lenient if it's a fish restaurant. But if non-kosher, let's say, if you tell me it's all kosher fish, even less of an issue. Right? But if it's a fish restaurant, what are they going to serve? Clams, oysters, shrimp, all these things. They cook it on the same grill. How can you say that's kosher? Right? It's a non-kosher grill. Even if you would put your kosher fish or whatever on that grill in aluminum foil, you'd wrap it up. It doesn't come in contact with anything else. Guess what? Doesn't help you. Right? It shouldn't help you. It would be, I'll throw this out there. Someone goes on a plate. They have a kosher meal. Now you'll notice by a kosher meal, it's like totally sealed. It looks like it's never been touched by human hands. Totally sealed. And they heat it up in an oven. Right? They heat it up in the oven on the plate. So how could you eat it? The oven's trafe. The oven is a non-kosher oven. Right? So you shouldn't be allowed to eat it. But what's the leniency? How are we allowed to eat it? Because it's double wrapped. Right? Nothing is going to come in contact with it. Even if the oven is dirty. Even if something's splattered in the oven. This thing is double sealed. It's not going to hit the first seal, and it's certainly not going to get into the food. So if a Jew has one oven, technically speaking, I wouldn't do this. Well, technically speaking, if you had one oven, right, you want to use it for milk and meat. There are a few ways to do it. One is to make sure whatever food you cook is double sealed. So therefore nothing splatters. Oh, let's say better. First thing is make sure the oven's clean. Nothing splattered on the oven walls. I'm not saying you have to kasher the oven per se. Should, but you don't necessarily have to. If it's totally clean, and I double wrap whatever I'm eating, and underneath the pot or the pan or whatever it is that's going in the oven, you put aluminum foil so it doesn't drip on the rack, on the oven rack. And then you make sure that if that's the case, and even if something dripped on it, okay, but didn't drip on the food, didn't drip on the oven rack, didn't drip on the oven floor. If it drips on the oven floor, also got a problem. Just like it's in the wall, right? It's going to be a problem. So if it doesn't drip anywhere, there's no steam, I should be able to eat it. Why? No steam, no spill, double wrapped. Now, the best way to do it, I would say, is if you wanted to use an oven for milk and meat. So let's say today you want to eat something meat, right? And let's say better. Yesterday you ate something dairy. You cook something dairy hot in the oven. Right? So what do? You want to eat meat today. So after you finish cooking the dairy thing, you know you're going to eat meat the next day. So clean out the oven. Make sure no spills. Let it sit till the next day. Then turn up the oven. Right? You really should put in, let's say, Easy Off or some caustic cleaner in the oven. Right? And then turn the oven as high as it'll go for like an hour. Then I could use it for dairy, or I could use it for meat the next day. It's a little bit of a pain to do this. Right? But if a person was going to use an oven, that's the way you would do it. Otherwise, I would say like this. Whatever you eat the most of during the week, let's say it's meat. If you eat meat most of the week, or most of your meals you're having meat, then use the oven for meat. So you're going to tell me I want to eat dairy. What do I do for dairy? Buy a toaster oven. Buy a nice size toaster oven. Whatever you want to cook dairy, you don't cook that often anyway. Use that. Or if you use the oven for mostly dairy or par, let's say it's not milk or meat. So if I use it for mostly dairy, then get a toaster oven for meat. Right? But you run into a lot of problems if I want to use one oven for both. All right, that's really the issue. There are a number of problems. So it's better to use it for one or the other. Microwave is worse. Why? Because a microwave in general doesn't work exactly the same as an oven. It's a smaller area and things splatter. And it's going to get on the wall, it's going to get on the floor. Yeah, you can clean it up, whatever, but to use it for both is highly problematic. So the rabbis would say the same advice. You want to use the microwave, use it for meat or milk, one or the other. Don't use it for both. Why? Because Kaufman's law is something always spills. And then it's harder to kasher. Right? Because there are ovens. There are microwaves. Let's say they have a fan on top. Let's say they have like little holes in the top. And let's say something splatters. You can't clean that. It's impossible to clean. Right? So you can clean as best to your ability, but if you need to kasher it, you'll put in, let's say, you'll put in a bowl and you fill it up with water. You fill it to the top with water. And then you put it on, for half an hour. Let steam get all over the place. According to many rabbinical authorities, that kashrus. Right? But they would say don't use it for Passover. Passover, different issue. There is a possible way to kasher it, but you shouldn't. Again, and I think a microwave is worse than an oven. First of all, it's a smaller area, and second of all, if something will spill or splatter, it will. So then you get all kinds of issues. So it's better to use the microwave either for milk or for meat. A person can have two microwaves, right? Microwaves are not so expensive. But if a person can't afford two microwaves, use one. And use it for the most they use it for. If you majority things, you use the dairy. So use it for dairy, or vice versa. Now, what about an oven top? Just I'm on this topic. What do you do with the stove top? So I would say the same thing. If you use it the majority for meats, so use it for meat. Right? Use the stove top for meat. Now, what if you want to cook dairy? Either get a separate burner, or when you want to use dairy, what do? Let's say it's gas. You turn up the gas as high as it'll go and let it go for half an hour. So you say, how's that going to help? Because the burner itself, if there's anything there, it'll get burnt off. It'll get totally burnt off. And usually if there's anything there anyway, it's not edible. In either case, it's not edible. Right? But you should burn it off. Even electric, same thing. Turn the electric stovetop, one of the burners, turn it up for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, as high as it'll go. That'll burn anything that's there. And then use it for dairy. Right? And the others you can use for meat. Right? But, again, you got to be careful. You got to be careful. Yeah, that's what I would say. In general, getting around some kashrus issues. Also, let's say you had one sink. Forgot to mention that. You got one sink. So how are you gonna wash dishes that are meat and milk? Because you wash dishes in hot water and something could splatter. Then you have milk and meat residue together. That would be a problem. Right? The general rule is either use separate basins, plastic basins for milk and meat. So therefore nothing ever touches the sides of the sink or the sink bottom. That's one way. That'd be one way out of it. Or when you wash the dishes, make sure you wash them in your hand, and you make sure they don't touch the sides or the bottom. In other words, you should have a rack on the bottom. And even if, God forbid, the dish hits the rack, okay, but it didn't hit the bottom floor, it didn't hit the sides. Because most likely they're trafe, right? There's going to be a mixture of milk and meat there somehow, maybe. Right? So there are issues with that also. So you want to get out of that problem, you have one sink. Right? I'd say, well, why don't you just use it for one or the other? You can't necessarily do that. Because the person can eat meat and dairy. Right? So, you might have a whole bunch of plates. You don't want to wash them in the bathroom, whatever the case is. So you get separate basins. Clean out the sink. Put a let's say a meat rack down. Put your meat basin on the rack, and then wash it in the basin. Right? So then, let's say the next day you have dairy. You want to wash some dairy dishes. You take out your dairy basin, your dairy rack that goes on the bottom of the sink. Right? You put that in, you wash it that way. You shouldn't wash them in one or the other. Because if you have one basin for both things, you got a problem also. Because of residue. In general, and that's why you have to have separate sponges. You're going to say, wow, drive me nuts. You got to have all these different things. You got to pay attention. You're right. Sponges are a problem because they could have real residue on them. A person cleans a dish, you don't necessarily clean off the sponge. I mean, a lot of people will clean off the sponge, but there could be residue there. Then you can tell me, well, it's cold. Right now it's cold. And I put in, liquid detergent to clean it. So even if it was meat, no one's ever going to eat it. Okay. You can get around a lot of problems. I'm not saying you're not going to get around a lot of problems with that. But again, there are other issues. There are many, many other issues. Right? So, the kitchen's like a war zone. You know how to use it. You have to know how to navigate it if you're going to keep kosher properly. And whatever, it takes effort. But, a person gets certain things down, it becomes like second nature. But problem is, we can mix things up. Yeah, I'll give one example. Person's got a dairy pot. They're cooking noodles. Right? Noodles with cheese. So they're stirring the pot, not really paying attention, and they realize they have a meat spoon. Looks the same as the dairy pot. They weren't paying attention to the meat spoon. So now I got a question. I got a bunch of questions. First of all, was the spoon used within 24 hours? Second of all, how much, were the noodles hot when you mixed it? How long ago was the pot used? Was the pot used within 24 hours? So I got three major questions. I got a question on the spoon, I got a question on the pot, and I got a question on the food. Now, we're ultra religious. You'll throw out the food, you'll kasher the pot and the spoon. You don't necessarily have to do that. I mean, obviously, you have to know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, you ask an Orthodox rabbi what to do, right? But, this can certainly happen. A friend of mine told the story. He had two ovens, had a meat oven, dairy oven, and his wife was making pizza, and her son, her young son threw a hot piece of pizza in a dairy oven that was on. Sorry, in a meat oven that was on. You got hot pizza, hot meat oven, come in contact. That's a big problem. That's a big problem. You can say, okay, maybe we don't have exactly these problems, but if you have one oven, you can definitely mess it up. Very easily mess it up. And you have to know a little bit about kashrus, know what's the question or not. That's why, even if someone quote unquote keeps kosher, if they haven't gone through the laws, they don't know what they're doing. And it's very easy to mess up. I was telling somebody, someone's parents that are becoming religious, I ate by them, and this and that. I said, why would you eat by my parents anymore? So I said, because they never learned the law of the kashrus. And this is over Shabbos, by the third meal. And I was telling them, how easy it is to mess things up. So as I was opening up my big mouth, here I was pouring salad dressing that was dairy onto a meat plate. I mean, how easy it is to mess things up, and I'm going like this, pouring salad dressing. I realized there was dairy. We're eating on meat plates. Now, there was nothing wrong, first of all, because the meat plate is cold, and the salad dressing is cold. So all I had to do was wash it off, right? Not a problem. And if I was eating with plastic anyway, right? Plastic utensils, so I didn't have to kasher those, right? That wasn't an issue. But if I was eating with a meat fork and I got dairy salad dressing on it, all I had to do was wash it off. I don't even have to kasher it; just have to wash it off because it's cold. If let's say the fork would have been piping hot, with meat residue on it, that would have been a problem. But if it's not hot, they're both cold. All I do is wash it off, right? So a person has to realize that they have a kashrus question. If they're keeping kosher, you have to know, if it's something hot gets mixed, let's say something hot meat got mixed with something cold dairy, yeah, that's going to be a problem. Maybe it'd be a problem, or if they're both hot, certainly going to be a problem. But if they're cold, I'm not saying I can eat it together, but if both things are cold, then I don't have to kasher it, right? I have to wash it off. Maybe there's some residue, but I don't have to kasher it. There are no kashering issues here, right? Only when there's a transfer of heat. So those are general rules. With that, somebody asks, why is Darno written in ancient Hebrew letters? I mean, what ancient Hebrew letters you're talking about? Right? If you look at the Torah scroll, the Torah scroll is written without vowels. Right? Isn't that ancient Hebrew letters without vowels? Right? So that has to be clarified. What ancient letters you're talking about? Because the Torah scroll doesn't have vowels. Torah scroll, has Hebrew letters without vowels. So any other thing that we have printed today outside of the Torah scroll has vowels. Otherwise, a lot of people are not going to be able to read it. Right? Every Chumash, right? Every 5 books of Moses, Tanakh, every Tanakh has vowels. Right? Written in Hebrew. Right? It's not written in the ancient Hebrew without vowels. No one's going to read it. No one's going to know how to read it. Right? We do say that commentators, the comment on the Talmud or the Code of Jewish Law, they use a certain Rashi script. Right? Rashi script something else. Right? That's just a different way of writing, the Aleph, Beis, Gimel, etc. But that doesn't have to be written. So it doesn't have to be written in ancient letters. Right? The different script. That's how most things are written today. That's how most works are written today. Right? In Rashi script. Some are written, outright in Hebrew. And even those books, commentaries on the Torah or commentaries on the Talmud, they're not written with vowels. But they're not written the same way as the Torah scroll. Who says I have to write it like a Torah scroll? Right? It's a lot easier a lot easier to read, in regular Hebrew letters than try and break your teeth on it, if it was written in the Torah scroll. Right? Because if I wrote it in that language, who says it's any holier? There are certain things if you did. I'm not going to say not. There are certain things if they're written a certain way. If they were written, let's say, like a Torah scroll, they may have more holiness. They definitely may have more holiness. Right? But, the vast majority of commentators that are written, that comment on the Talmud, the Code of Jewish Law, etc., is written, in Hebrew letters. There's no vowels. Let's make clear, there are no vowels, but it's not written the same way as the Torah scroll. Right? I think it would be harder to do. I think it would be much harder to read. Right? But, who says, if I look at a Ritva or a Rashba or the Rambam, and it's not written in, the way a Torah scroll is written, who says it doesn't have holiness? Or just the opposite. Who says it has much more holiness if it's written that way? Maybe it does. Right? Right? I don't want to curse myself here. Maybe it does have more holiness because it's written in that script. Maybe. Right? But you don't see the vast majority of the books written that way. Right? So certainly it's not forbidden to do that. And second of all, I think it would be a lot easier to read in regular Hebrew letters and try to read from a Torah scroll. Right? Writing from a Torah scroll doesn't, if the commentaries would write, they would print those books like that, in a like a Torah scroll, and how it's written in the Torah. Does that make the book any holier? I don't think it does. I could be wrong. I don't think it does. Right? It's a lot easier to write. It's a lot easier to read the other way. But there are two things. There are two things going on here that are the same. Whether it's written the way it's written in the Torah scroll, or it's written the way we write it today. In any of these books, they don't have vowels. Most of what they write do not have vowels unless they quote a verse, and they have to explain the verse, in a certain way that the vowels are crucial. Then they'll put in vowels for certain words. But usually they don't. Which is one of the things, in general that, the Christians, the Messianics say, we don't need the rabbis, we don't need the oral law, we got our own scholars and this and that. We never follow the rabbi. Well, that's a crock. That's totally not true. How do I know it's not true? Because I take any Christian scholar, right? I take any Messianic, and I open up a Torah scroll anywhere, right? I'll open it anywhere. Doesn't matter. And I say, okay, start reading. They're not going to be able to read it. How do I know they're not going to be able to read it? Because they don't know grammar. They don't know. The only way they're going to be able to read it, if they could read it, is if there are vowels. They're not going to be able to read it without vowels. Maybe they can read some words, but they won't be able to read the vast majority of it. They need vowels. But who put the vowels in the Masoretic text? The rabbis. The rabbis vocalize the Masoretic text. What's the Masoretic text? What comes from the Masoretic text? King James. King James version comes from that. So a Messianic should say, or a Christian should say, there are a lot of things we don't hold by the rabbis. Fine. They can argue, they can say whatever they want, but they cannot say, I never rely on the rabbis. Now they can never say that's a lie. That 100% is a lie. Because without the rabbis, they wouldn't even have King James. They wouldn't have a King James version. Nothing. They wouldn't know how to read it. Period. I think that's pretty clear. If you tell me you pick and choose what the rabbis say, I'll have issues, but I won't have as many issues. All you have to do is admit I pick and choose. Fine. Right? But some people are stubborn. And they say, we never listen to the rabbis. We never listen to anything the rabbis say. Not true. Find me a Christian scholar that can read the Sefer Torah from beginning to end, right, without vowels. Not going to happen. Never going to happen. They'd be lucky to read a couple words, a couple lines. I'll be generous. A couple lines. Right? But they are absolutely 100% relying on us to put in the vowels. Because if we didn't put in the vowels, they're never going to know what it means. Right? So again, who says that, commentaries have to write like a Torah scroll? Does it make it any holier? I don't think it makes it any holier. I don't think it makes any holier at all. The ancient letters have any meaning. We say it's a holy language, right? We say it's definitely a holy language. I don't think there's any question about that. No question about that. But, in the Torah scroll, it has to be written a certain way. If you read the book of Esther and it comes from a scroll, you have to write it a certain way. Okay? Right, there is a question. Can a person read it from just a regular Bible and fulfill their obligation of reading the book of Esther? Right? If you have nothing else, okay, but it's definitely better to read it from parchment. But who says everything else has to be? Nobody says that. At least it's not as far as I know. Nobody says such a thing. It does have holiness. The letters have holiness, no question. That's absolutely no question. Right? But the rest of the Torah, the rest of the commentaries and anything else we read, Jewish law, philosophy, who says it has to be in that language? Who says it has to be written that way? We see it's not written that way. So the question is, why not? And my question would be, why should it be? Right? How do you answer a question with another question? Why shouldn't it be? It doesn't have to be. Right? It doesn't have to be in any way, shape, or form. You might tell me maybe it's holier doing it that way. Could be. Could very well be, but you don't have to. No question, you don't have to. Right. So someone here says the Masoretes relied on the oral tradition. Right. They relied on the oral tradition to write the Torah in English or whatever language they understood 100%. Because otherwise they wouldn't understand it. There's no way to understand it without the vowels. The Jews wouldn't understand it without the vowels. That's why we have an oral tradition. Tell me what it means. Right? You need an oral tradition. Because the Torah says don't cook a calf in its mother's chet lamed beis. It could either be chalav, which means milk, or put other vowels in there, chalif. What is chalif? Forbidden fat. You're not allowed to cook a mother and it's forbidden fat. Well, guess what? Most yeshiva students wouldn't be able to eat that if that's the case. They get served all kinds of things in fat. And meat, fat, whatever. Right? So we understand you can't cook a calf in its mother's milk. Right? Laws of kashrus come from this verse. It says it 3 times. But if I didn't have the vowels, how do I know how to read it? I would never know how to read it. Right? The person here points out if it wasn't for oral tradition, couldn't interpret it. Right? Now they can say we're wrong. We interpret it the wrong way. They can say what they want. They can say we make all kinds of mistakes. That's fine. They can say what they want. But without the vowels, they could never read it. Right? They can't even interpret it without the vowels. They wouldn't know how to read it. They wouldn't know what it says. They wouldn't know how to translate it. All the more so they wouldn't know how to interpret it. Right? And there are many things you need oral law for, but that's not the point of this discussion. The point is, bottom line, they need vowels. Right? If the Christians don't have vowels, they don't have a King James version. No one could translate it. They wouldn't know how to translate anything without the vowels. So I would say, just admit you rely on the rabbis for certain things. You throw out everything else, but you rely on them for certain things. You pick and choose. Fine. I will not have such an issue with that. You just have to admit the truth. But if you're going to, stand fast, and there are people like that, and they're going to stand fast, and they're going to say, we never rely on the rabbis, not for anything, that's a lie. That 100% is a lie. That's this case. Yeah. So any other questions on any of that? Someone says that the Septuagint, interesting, was King Ptolemy put 70 Jews in 70 different places, told them to write the Torah. And they all came up with the same translation. Right? They came up with the same translation. Now, according to what they say it's written by the rabbis. They all had divine inspiration in this case. Right? All had divine inspiration. They wrote the same thing. Right? Each one wrote exactly the same translation. So someone wants to claim the rabbis only interpreted the first 5 books. Why? So what happened to Tanakh? Rabbis didn't interpret Tanakh. Got plenty of commentaries on Tanakh. Right? Even though, you're right, Tanakh was, you got prophets. And God gave over messages to the prophets to give over to the Jewish people. That's true. But how do we understand the prophecy? Prophets don't explain anything in general. They just state what God said. Give a lot of mussar, give a lot of ethics. They're not interpreting anything. I mean, they are to a certain extent. God's giving them nevuah. God's giving them prophecy. They have to get the prophecy right. And they give it over, each one according to, the way they give it over. They don't always, Isaiah doesn't use the same language necessarily as Ezekiel or as Jeremiah. They have their own language over here, right? But they're telling you, okay, do this, don't do that. You're in trouble over here if you do this. All these different things, right? But who says that the rest of the prophets are written by Greek scholars? Who says that? Why is it written by Greek scholars? Where the prophets come from? They were made up by Greeks. I mean, everyone agrees, the Christians and the Muslims, and others agree these prophets are real prophets. Now, they convolute everything and say we're not chosen anymore, different things, but they agree they're prophets, not written by Greeks, not a fairy tale. We're not talking about a fairy tale. You're talking about the Septuagint. The Septuagint, again, was only the 5 books. It wasn't Tanakh. They didn't translate Tanakh. How can you say Tanakh was for sure written by the rabbis? Where do you see it was written by the rabbis? They were prophets. Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Samuel the prophet. You got King Solomon, you got King David. Are going to be written by the rabbis. Rabbis interpreted what they said. Right? No question. And then the whole question about Purim, the rabbi said, we're going to have for all generations, blah, blah, blah. The Talmud tells me. But who says that? Yeah, so let them say the Greeks wrote it. Okay. Greeks prophets? They're not prophets. Not going to anybody. They're not prophets. Paganism at best. Right? When God, when Isaiah says God spoke to me, he said this, and he's giving over this, rabbis wrote that. It got written down. 100% it got written down. But that's pure prophecy. Not a made-up thing. That was not a made-up thing. It was codified by the rabbis, all the 24 books. That's true. Right? And it was written down, 100% true. But when it was written down, it was written down to the prophecies of what the prophet said. They didn't just make it up. Because if you're going to tell me, well, these prophets aren't really prophets, and they're only saying things based on their own, again, I got the Christians and the Muslims to agree they were prophets. Again, they may say, we're not chosen anymore, all kinds of different things. But they'll agree they're prophets. So if they're prophets, they can't be written by Greeks. How can that be written by Greeks? Eventually, how it got written down, okay, that's the whole story. How it got written down. But it doesn't mean they weren't prophets. The story's being told, again, their prophecy goes through Moshe Rabbeinu. They can't contradict what Moshe says. So their prophecies were written down. They weren't written down by Greek scholars. You can say they were written down by the rabbis, fine. That doesn't contradict anything. It just says they were there to preserve it and write it down exactly the way it went down. Right? That's not an issue. I understand that's a Septuagint, right? That's, they had other things in there also, but that's not even the point. Right? But again, if they're claiming that Tanakh is written by other people, that's a different issue. Right? That would be a different issue. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, there are other questions. I'm going to sign out. I do this every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock Eastern time, 5 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Chaim Kaufman or Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism. You can send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHAIMCOFFMAN@gmail.com. Wish everyone a good beginning of the day or end of the day or almost end of the day. And everyone have a great rest of the week.